So again, our next speaker, Sara Bateman, discover how to make your audience a part of your show. So they look forward to hearing you again and again. Please welcome Sara Bateman, presenting on building an experience from the stage. Sara Bateman, take it away.
Thank you. After an event I had planned, a speaker came up to me and said, the audience, it was not supportive. It was not attentive. Now I'm going to call her Not My Fault Frida, because my response was, it's not their responsibility to be attentive and supportive. It's your responsibility to capture their attention by being creative and well prepared. How often have you been bored by a speaker? How often had you said to yourself, this is a waste of my time? How often have you said, this speaker does not relate to me? As a speaker, it is your responsibility to build rapport and trust. As a speaker, it's your responsibility to build an experience for your audience. Seth Godin, he's the author of Purple Cow, says you're either remarkable or invisible. And as speakers, we're either remarkable or forgotten. So make a decision now. Make a decision to be remarkable and remembered. Today, we're going to see how we can build ourselves up to be remarkable and rememberable. We're going to talk about before the presentation, during your presentation, and at the close. Also, at the end of my presentations, we'll have a few moments for questions. So if you have some questions during it, just be aware that you can write them down and we'll go over them later. So before your speech, how are you going to set yourself up to show your experience, to show your expertise, to grab their attention beforehand so that you are remarkable and rememberable? Well, one, you have to think about the distractions. What are the distractions in the room? Well, one distraction might be between your audience and the setup of the room. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is their view obstructed? Is there maybe a pillar that they're looking around? Can they hear? So it's a distraction between the audience and the room. Next, it might be a distraction between audience members. I remember I used to go to Taekwondo, and there was one lady who had dated many men. And so the distraction was whenever she came into the room, everybody was shuffling around because she didn't want to sit with near that guy or that guy or that guy. Something similar might be going on in your audience where some members are not getting along. Another distraction might be between the presenter and the audience. You can do whatever you can, but there's always going to be some people who do like you and some who don't. And the last distraction might be between the material being presented, the content, and the audience, where they're not sure that they are believing you. So, what have been some of your challenges when creating an experience from the stage? If you could type in chat, just a very short, brief example. I remember one experience I had. I went to see Ed Tate. He came up to Minnesota, and he stood on one side of the room, and he had everybody else line up on the other side of the room. And he asked one member of the audience to join him, and they walked across the room. And he next said, I want everybody to come across the room, but you can't repeat the way. Each way must be unique. So since the first audience member walked, you can no longer walk. And I remember people skipping and hopping and somersaulting, and there was a can-can line. Everybody made it across the room, but in a different and creative way. He was talking about creativity, and he got every member of the audience involved in his speech. Can you think of some way you have done that? Gary's going to read chat for me. Gary, are there any examples at this time?
Oh, yeah, there are quite a few.
Okay, could you pick out a couple, please?
How about a captive audience? People who have to be there.
Okay, what's the difference?
Let's see. Distracting hand gestures that don't help. AV issues, audiovisual issues. And my favorite, remembering what I'm going to say.
Right. So are there any unique experiences people have had, such as I did with Ed? Okay, well, that's fine. We'll just go on. Next, when you set yourself up to be remarkable and memorable, you must know your intent. And generally, there are two intents. There's one for the speaker and one for the audience members. Now, the speaker, his intent might be, I'm trying to gain new clients, I'm trying to educate, I'm trying to inspire, I'm just trying to have fun. His job is he needs to find out why the audience members are there. Why are they listening to him at this time? What is their intent and how can he fulfill it? Ask yourself, why are they listening to me? Because speaking is about change. And so how do you want your audience to feel, think, and behave differently? If you don't know where you want to take your audience, you'll all just be blindly wandering around and hoping you get to a point that is successful. This is Patricia Fripp. And I'm 5'2", so I feel like a giant today when I look at this picture, just mentioning that. She is a Hall of Fame speaker, and she was also the first female president of the National Speakers Association. And before she puts a speech together, she decides what is her premise for the speech. And so now we are going to look at her premise, and it goes like this: every blank can blank so they can. Well, so how do you fill that in? Well, it goes every who. Well, who's in your audience? Today is Toastmasters. Can what? Maybe can polish their skills. That's the action they're going to take. So they can. What's their dream? What's their goal? Maybe they want to become a professional speaker. Maybe they want to present at the Tilly. Maybe they want to do a contest. So those are the three answers that you put in there. So an example would be every Toastmaster can every Toastmaster can become a masterful speaker so they can spread their message. Here are a couple more. Every manager can build their communication skills so they can earn a promotion. Or every entrepreneur can learn marketing to build their business. Think of some of the presentations you have given. Think about the premise. Can you put your speech into a premise? And if so, please put it in chat, and I'll give you about 2 minutes so that you can type, and I'll be quiet. Hey, Gary, would you please share some of the premises people have written?
Sure.
Thank you.
Every person can learn about others so they can better communicate.
Nice. Thank you.
Every person can speak so they can effectively communicate.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And how about one more?
Every speech evaluator can learn the fundamentals of providing effective feedback so that they can help the person who is presenting continue their journey of growth.
Thank you. Very nicely done, everybody. So next, you must pass the who cares test. Why should they spend their precious time listening to you? How will you make their lives better or easier? What problems will you solve? When you speak with the audience, do not use I-focused words such as I will share with you, I will tell you about, because they don't care. They don't care what you're going to do. What they care about is what they will gain. So say, you will receive, you will walk away with, those types of sentences where you put your audience into your speech so that they know exactly what they will walk away with. The interest, and remember, the audience is always mostly interested in themselves. And then before rapport. How can you build a before rapport? Now, this is to break the ice with your audience a little bit. This is to get them into the mood of listening to your speech. And I've seen speakers, when it's an in-person presentation, they will go and introduce themselves to the audience members one by one. Well, on Zoom, you can also do that if the crowd is a little bit smaller than today, where you can go out and talk to everybody. So think about, how are you going to build the relationship with your audience even before you utter your first word? Then how are you approaching the stage? What type of energy are you showing? Is it nervous energy? Is it timid energy? Or do you approach it with confidence? What is your mindset as you approach the stage? And what does it look like? You have that moment before you begin speaking. Take advantage of that moment, because that's the transition between being a part of the crowd to being the expert on stage, to stepping into that spotlight. I learned from an actress to breathe in the energy from the audience. And then I add a mantra to it and I breathe it back out. So there's a circle of energy between me and the audience. My mantra is, let's have fun, because many times I get very heavy in my speaking. So I want people to have fun, because I think that's the best way to learn, is to learn with fun. The world champion speaker, Ed Tate, he was the world champion in 2000. He says, hey, there is someone who needs to hear my story. Don't let my ego get in the way. So think about what you're talking to yourself, what you're telling yourself, just that moment before. And then you're ready to begin. So how do you make yourself remarkable during? Well, first, you need to establish yourself on the stage. And Ed Tate, he does an 8-second pause where he just scans the audience. I've tried that. It seems like an eternity. But the reason he does that, it gives people time to put away their distractions. And the contrast of the silence draws their attention. So what can you do that will make your audience drop their distractions and look at you? Also, you can pause throughout your speech to reconnect with your audience, to give them a moment to reflect on what you're saying so that they can digest it more easily. Oops, I got ahead of myself. Next, is the foundational phrase. And this phrase was coined by Craig Valentine. He's the 1999 world champion of public speaking. And so your foundational phrase, it encapsulates your takeaway message. So it's easy for the audience to remember. It should be 10 words or fewer. It should be short and to the point. It's also a barometer for your speech. It helps you decide what should stay in your speech and really what belongs to another speech. It can be witty and pithy, something that will stick in their minds, such as a jingle like Coke, the real thing, or Just Do It from Nike. At this time, what is one of the most famous phrases, foundational phrases you have ever heard? It was in a speech about 60 years ago. Does anybody have an idea? Please put it in chat. Okay, Gary, what is in chat at this time?
I have a dream.
Yes, I have a dream. Every time I hear I have a dream, memories come rushing back to me. I remember the history of the time, the civil rights movement, the hopes, the dreams. It all comes rushing back. There are other foundational phrases such as Craig Valentine's, which is change small, change often. He had that one. Ryan Avery, he was the world champion in 2012. His was just push through it. That was a quote from his grandmother. And every time he came up to an obstacle, he would just push through it. So it's pithy, it's short, it's something the next day you can tell a friend. And of course, always make them a part of your speech, your presentation. Ed brought me up on stage one time, and he did an exercise called Over the Top. And this is an exercise to build your energy. If you have trouble having enough energy during a presentation, you practice it as if you were a rock star. You go all out, you do everything you can think of to make it huge. And Ed was at the side of the stage and I was doing my presentation. And if I didn't have enough energy, he'd start jumping up and down. And then I'd have to put more energy into it. So that's how he made me a part of his presentation. How can you make audience members a part of your presentation? And then, of course, always be authentic. People are not here to see a watered down version of a famous speaker. They're here to listen to you. They're here because they're interested in your prospects, your opinions, your perspective. What are your ideas? They've heard the ideas of other speakers. They're here to hear yours. So always be authentic and be yourself. And next, address their concerns. Well, what does that mean? It means that if there's something that they're thinking about, something that they see that they're going to question and it's going to take their attention away from your presentation, address it right up front. Then it's out of their mind, they've dealt with it, and it's gone. Henry Cho, he does this wonderfully. He's a stand-up comedian. And this is how he addresses that.
Howdy. How y'all doing? Yeah, I know what may be going through your mind right now. Just let it soak in a second or two, because there's something wrong with this picture, ain't there? You're kind of going, hang on, that's Norino up there talking like a hillbilly. And I know this ain't quite right, but you'll get used to it, I swear, okay? Because I talk this way all the time, but I know when...
Uh-oh, sorry. Next, I heard Ryan Avery when he came up to Minnesota. And he is, of course, the 2012 world champion of public speaking. And he addressed his female qualities. He seemed a little effeminate on stage. And he looked right at the audience and says, "Don't worry about it. My wife is okay with it." So people weren't there wondering about him. He addressed it right at the front. So if there's something that you need to address at the front, address it so that they can get used to it and go on to your presentations. Next, what are your voice dynamics? I love voice dynamics because they can texture your speech, they can add emotion, they can add so much to your speech. And in a moment, I'm going to say a word. And if everybody would unmute at this time, it's okay, just unmute. I'm going to give you 2 scenarios, and I'd like you to say the word. The word is no. No.
Oh,
No, not yet, not yet. In a moment, not yet. So the first scenario is there's a little kitten nibbling at your toes. Cute little kitten. How are you going to say no? How are you going to say no to that kitten?
No, kitty.
no.
Yeah, cute little kitten.
No.
Now you're in a dark alley. It's cold out. You can't see very well. And there's this giant of a person coming towards you. How do you say no?
No.
Buzz off.
All right. So it's quite a different no. If you please all mute again. It's quite a different no. So you don't have to think about the mechanics of should I go louder here or softer or faster or slower? Think about the emotions because you will automatically put it in the right perspective. You use the right pace. You use the right volume just by thinking about the emotions. And of course, every speech needs a message. And you can only have one primary message. Have you ever tried to eavesdrop on 2 conversations at the same time? I have. And it never worked because I would get overwhelmed. I'd hear a bit of this, a bit of that. Well, the same is with your message. Your audience can only concentrate on one message at a time. So make sure you have a strong one. And then play with it. Craig Valentine, who was the world champion speaker, he says, the message is in the mess with age. So your message might not come out first. You might be working on your presentation and then all of a sudden you're going, oh, that's the message. So that make sure it's strong, make sure it connects with your audience. And then how are you going to pique their interest? How are you going to do that? A good way is to ask a question because our brains are built to answer questions. We can't just sit there and not have that question answered. So ask them a question. Another is to arouse their curiosity. So think about, on your last presentation, how did you grab your audience's attention? And then pace elements. Now, what is a pace element, you might be asking? Well, a pace element is there to re-engage your audience because you'll need to re-engage them often during your presentation. And it's any change that they can see or hear. A pace element might be me asking Gary to check chat. Well, you're hearing a different voice then. And there's many pace elements, but I'm going to just go through a few. 1, talking head. Hey, that's me. 2, a short and meaningful video clip. Type in chat. A well-told story. I've been telling stories throughout this presentation. Phone share. Do you have a message on your phone, maybe in a voicemail that you want to share with your audience? You can share it. You can do a live screen web search, which is something I would never do with my technical skills, but some of you would be able to do that. Slide shares, such as what we're doing right now, PowerPoint. And raise your hand if. I'm sure plenty of you have heard this. Raise your hand if. Now, make sure it's a good question, not raise your hand if you want to double your salary next year. We've heard that. But you can think of something creative to ask them to raise their hand. And the movement gets them also involved in your speech. You might want to take a poll. Breakout rooms are buzz groups. Breakout rooms are for online presentations, and buzz groups are for in-person, where you have these little groups get together and do a discussion. And Q&A section. You answer the audience's questions. And one I learned from Darren LaCroix, who is also a world champion of public speaking, he has keepers. And he hands out a piece of paper and has his keepers at the top. And it's for those aha moments when it's like, oh my goodness, I could use that. I want to remember that. Because he knows that even if people take a lot of notes, they won't review them. But if they pull out the keepers, the things that they want to concentrate on, they're more likely to review them and use them. So what is your roadmap? Where are you going? Where are you taking them? You need to put the roadmap at the beginning of your speech, near the beginning. And if you'll remember, mine was before, during, and the close, that we were going to think about how to be remarkable at those 3 points. It needs to be easily followed. And many times people use things like, I've got 3 tools or 5 columns, or we're going to go on a journey. Sometimes they use acronyms such as JOB, just over broke, or SMART. We remember this is the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. Well, Mark Brown, who is the 1999 world champion of public speaking, he used SCREAM. And unfortunately, his time was cut. He didn't have time for SCREAM, but he still had the letters. So he cut it down to SAM. So if you're going to use an acronym, have a backup plan. Willie Jolly, who's a Hall of Fame speaker, he uses dream, decide, and do. I love that roadmap. It's so easy. You can, if I get off track, I can come back. Oh, we're in the decide stage, we're in the do stage. It's easy to reconnect with your audience and have your audience catch up. And then an anchor. We need anchors. And an anchor is anything that helps your audience remember your speech. They need to be vivid. They need to be easily understood. I remember a real estate seminar decades ago. And what they gave me when I went in was a little pen. It was a black pen. It had a gold circle. And in the middle of that circle, it said, "To it." Their presentation was, get around to it. Don't waste, don't procrastinate. Just get around to it. And I can remember that presentation, that message from decades ago, even though I probably lost that pen 20 years ago. So what are your anchors? What are some of the good ones? Well, a very powerful one can be a story. This is the airplane that went into the Hudson River. If you'll remember, Captain Scully, he was able to save all the passengers. Well, there was a passenger on there called Rick Elias. And his opening statement was a story about his experience. And he said, imagine a big explosion as you climb through 3,000 feet. Imagine a plane filling up with smoke. Imagine an engine going clang, 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 clang. Wow, isn't that a powerful opening? Isn't that a powerful anchor? If you heard that story, would you want to hear more of it? Notice how he used imagine. Imagine is a very powerful tool because it can take you anywhere. It took us onto the plane with Rick Elias, but it can take us to a snowbank in Minnesota, a beach on Hawaii. It can take us anywhere because imagine gets past that inner critic in your audience's mind. So use it. A shocking statement can also be a good anchor. When I do my job, people hate me. In fact, the better I do my job, the more people hate me. So would you please type in chat A, B, C, or D as to what her job was. And I'll give you a couple moments to do that. Hey, Gary, do we have some answers?
Yeah.
Okay, could you read off some of them?
A, C, B, A or D, C, A, C, A, D.
Okay. Well, Sally Cohn, she was on Fox News. She was a news commentator. But the reason people hated her was because she was a liberal and a lesbian. She got tons of hate mail and didn't last very long. But it caught my attention when she made that statement. So how are you going to catch your audience's attention and anchor that in their mind? Next, as we're nearing the end of our presentations, we might have a question and answer period. And you're thinking, well, what happens if I get there and nobody has a question? Well, at the beginning of your presentation, set it up so that they know that a question and answer period is coming. You might say, at the end of my presentation, I have a few minutes to take a couple of questions. Now, you don't want to end on somebody's question. I remember being at one presentation, and the lady was talking about behavior problems in children and how to deal with them. And she gave several techniques. Well, at the end of her presentation, the last question was, will this also work on dogs? It took way off topic. So always have the last word, just in case that last question is not a question you want to end with. So you say something like, we have a few moments for question and answer, and then I have one more brief point to share with you. Also, what happens if nobody asks a question? I've seen that also where they get, oh, does anybody have any questions? And the audience is silent. Well, provide your own. You can say, many times people have asked me, and then you go into your question and then you answer it yourself. Once the first question is taken and done, the audience is more likely to step in with their own questions. Another way is to plant somebody in your audience, a friend or somebody, and they can ask the first question. Again, once that question is over, more likely that others will participate. But always, always have the last word. And stay on topic. You cannot get to the end of your presentation and all of a sudden add new information, a new topic. I remember I was at a Tony Robbins event. It was a Zoom event. And for 3 days, it was high energy, and it was how to improve and how to get the best out of yourself. And the audience was excited. And then the 4th day, almost the last presentation, the presenter got onto Zoom stage and wanted to talk about masks. And more importantly, he wanted to convince us in the middle of COVID not to wear masks. People were infuriated. The chats turned from, we love you, Tony, to, I didn't sign up for this. I want my money back. People had already decided if they were going to wear masks or not. And to go way off topic like that ruined the whole mood for that event, for this audience. And then they had to work very hard to get the audience back. So stay on topic and don't add. And as you near the end of your presentation, always leave them on a high note. I went to one convention. And the last two speeches were about domestic violence. Now, I think these are very important topics and they should be discussed. They should be spoken about. But having it at the very end and hearing every bit of abuse these two women went through, I felt like I was beat up by the time I got out of that conference. One thing might have been the conference could have scheduled them earlier so that the last words were not these two presentations. Another thing, you might lighten up. Tell your audience, here's how you can deal with this. Here's hope. Here's organizations to support you. Or you might even add humor. Darren LaCory talks about his mentor, and his mentor had bladder cancer. And in his presentation, he said, he was talking about his bladder cancer, and he got to the point where the doctor asked him, what type of bladder do you want? And the guy looked at his doctor and said, a bigger one. Whole place cracked up. Now, you might not have something like that, but always make sure that it's an uplifting moment at the end of your speech. Oops. And then give them the next step. Only one next step. Because if you give too many choices, they'll do none of them. I remember listening to one speaker and he loves squash. And at the end of his presentation, he says, you can borrow this book about squashes from me, or you can go to the library and check it out, or you can go to Barnes and Nobles and buy it. Yes, they were all three good ideas, but people, when you give them that many choices, end up not taking any of them. They don't know what next step they should take. So only give them one. And at this time, if you would like to ask any questions, you can unmute and ask me. I'll take a couple. Those last words of the presentation, they are as important as the beginning words. They are the words that ring in your audience's mind when you leave the stage. They're the words they take out with them when they exit the room. They're the words they will share. So make them memorable. Don't be forgotten, be remembered. And as Patricia Fripp says, last words linger. Make yours remarkable. I'd like to thank everybody for this opportunity to speak to you.